And welcome to the Week 7 overview. In this video, we're going to go over the final project that is due this week. And I want you to listen up to some of the examples that I'm going to be giving, so it'll help you to do better on each of the issues involved. What's really important about this is there's so many things to do. You got to make sure that you understand each of the things you need to do and make sure you keep a detailed list of them. It's right here on the assignment, as we'll see. But once you keep that list and you know each of the things you need to do, you'll have your best chance to doing really well on the final project. All right, first thing you want to note is that, again, you're essentially a detective, perhaps, or someone in management in a criminal justice organization. You might think of it just as a police department. You are maybe a lieutenant or a commander, and you've been asked by the chief to deal with a particular problem that has come up in the area, and that the public is now sort of out there asking the department about what they're going to do about this problem. Your chief wants to be able to have a good research study done on the problem so that whatever it is the chief decides they're going to do, they have backup in terms of saying to those who will criticize the chief on this that they have good research. They have a good study that has been done that tells them what is the right thing to do in terms of where to put the resources to deal with this problem. Now, the problem, of course, is whatever you've chosen initially. It could be domestic violence, it could be recidivism for people in prison, that sort of thing. Whatever it is that you've chosen, that's the area that you're going to be getting into, of course. All right, so let's go through exactly what we need to do in the assignment, but keep that in mind as to who you are and what role you're playing for the purpose of the course project. All right, the first thing you're going to do here, if you look at this list, we've got 4 things here, but if you go down, there's actually 5 Roman numerals here of things to do, and each has subparts, so lots of things to do. Now remember that most of what this is being asking you to do, you have already done, at least in draft form, and now it simply has to be tidied up so that it really meets the requirements. You have probably seen some areas where you probably didn't do as well as you would like to have done, and now it's the time to improve that. So let's go through each of these items, starting with Roman numeral 1. First is an introduction. So you're going to provide a brief overview of the contemporary issue you selected and its importance to the field of criminal justice. Include any necessary information to set the stage for your supervisor. Consider how the issue plays a larger role in the field of criminal justice. You should have already done that, but you want to make that a little bit better. So what you want to make sure is that you understand that you need to play up the importance of whatever it is that you decided to study. Essentially, play up the importance of the problem that you have decided to deal with in your study. Okay, so let's assume it's domestic violence. You have an increase of domestic violence over the past year. It's sort of doubled in your jurisdiction. You want to know why. If that's your area of inquiry, then you're going to play that up. Why is that important? Of course, it's very important. People getting hurt all the time. We know there's a cycle of domestic violence that happens because people, little kids, see it going on in the family, and they repeat the trend, and it goes down family to family for generations. And it's just a serious problem. It ends up with people being killed and all sorts of horrible things going on that we don't like to see. All right, so in that introduction, make sure that you do each of the things that's required here, which is provide that overview, tell us its importance both to the community and the field of criminal justice, and any necessary information to set the stage for what you are going to do in your study. You're going to tell your supervisor, based on this problem, for instance, this is what I am proposing in terms of a research study. Just generally, remember, we're talking about a paragraph or 2, and that's it in the introduction. All right, second is the literature analysis. You have already done it. You should have buffed it up on at least 2 different occasions so far, and you've extended it out a little bit with each time that we were looking at it. But number 1, you're going to want to summarize the research for each of the articles that you used, of the 5 that you had. And then you're also going to identify common themes that go across all of the literature. So if you had domestic violence studies for each of your articles, if you have domestic violence, for instance, What's the common theme that goes across all of those? You're going to have to find some. I hope that you were able to find articles that were close to what you wanted to deal with, and if you did, you'll find that there are common themes, and not all of them have everything in common, obviously, but they will have some common themes you're going to have to identify, and make sure you do that. That means you have to really understand these articles well in order to see the commonality between them, all of them. Okay, describe that with some detail. So you're talking about at least a paragraph or two for that. Next, what are the advantages of both qualitative and quantitative research methods in informing the decision making about your chosen issue? Now, this is having to do with your chosen issue. You're going to talk about which is the best, whether qualitative or quantitative research methods for what you're going to study. You're going to provide specific examples from your research to support your determination. You're going to talk about what is good about qualitative, what is good about quantitative, what is not so good about qualitative, what's not so good about quantitative research methods, and then how did you choose your particular method, and what advantages and disadvantages do you see for that method for your particular issue? That means your particular issue having to do with the problem area that you identified, not your particular study that you're going to do. I want to make sure you understand that. All right, also, not only the advantages, but disadvantages. Make sure you talk about the disadvantages. So, for instance, if I had a research study that I've gone through in some of my videos so far of, what are the best tactics and devices for preventing residential burglary, which is my research question, there's probably, quantitative analysis that would be very good for that. And the reason being is that I would like to know, for instance, of all the burglaries out there, how many of them were from breaking into a window, for instance, or breaking through a door. Well, if I can actually quantify that, I could probably get a pretty good piece of information about what kind of devices and tactics would prevent that. Burglar alarms, for instance, would be a pretty good deterrent to that kind of a break-in sort of burglary. But qualitative might be good too. I might be able to interview people who are, premier residential burglars who are in prison, and qualitatively ask them which kind of house would you want to burglarize most in terms of different houses that have certain characteristics. So I would lay out all the different houses with certain tactics that are being used, like lights have been left on at night. Burglar alarm systems have been installed and are operational. We have a neighborhood watch in the area. All these things we listed out. Which of these areas, and I would ask these people, these inmates essentially, which of these houses would you want to burglarize the most, and which one you want to burglarize the least? That would be a qualitative analysis. It's a qualitative analysis. I'm asking them a characteristic of something that they would either like or dislike in terms of whether they would break into someone's house to steal or not. And so I could talk about qualitative being very advantageous for that kind of a study. Quantitative might be good if I was looking at the study from the point of actually just going through and looking at the different burglaries that have occurred, figure out how they did occur, and then what kind of preventative measures would likely have been able to prevent them. All right, so I can look on both advantages and disadvantages of each of these different methodologies. So you're going to discuss that in terms of each study that you did, each of the 5. Now, you've done this before, but make sure you've buffed it up so that if you've gotten some grades that are not quite so good on those, that you first understand what you need to do, if you don't already, and then go to buffing it up significantly. Now, remember, I am here and available for you until the end of this class to help you to do well. So if something is an area you didn't do well in and you don't exactly understand why, you got to give me a call. You got to email me with some available dates and times, and let's get this call going so we can actually help you. Now, it's very important that since I usually have to be at a computer to talk to you to make it to actually look at your work at the same time as giving you advice, what I'd like you to do is send me 3 good dates and times along with your time zone in an email, and then we'll set up a telephone conference. Okay, very important you let me know your time zone because I'm in the Pacific time zone, and if we can't put together the time zones, we can't get together on the phone. So don't forget the time zone, and also don't forget to give me 3 good dates and times that are good for you, and I will choose one of those times based on my schedule, and we'll get that conference going. All right, next is number 3, methodology. In this section, you will make connections between the research methods used and the ability to conduct ethical and valid research. You've done this before also. You're going to draw connections between the research design and the methodology for each of the studies of each of your articles. What this means is you draw connections between the research design and methodology, meaning how does the research design that they put together meet with the methodology in terms of the design is going to be designed to do a certain study, to study a certain phenomena, whatever it is. How does that methodology make sense in terms of what you're trying to do with your research design? Are they in fact connected? And how are they connected? How does the what you want to do with the study, or what the study wanted to do, furthered by the methodology that they chose? Okay, remember we're dealing right now only with the literature analysis methodology specifically. Okay. And then you're going to also ask, how does the research design inform the methodology used, or vice versa? That's essentially the question you're going to answer, and that's going to be a couple paragraphs for each study. It doesn't have to be very long, but you have to understand what they were after, what methodology they use, and why those two sort of go together. Hopefully they do. If it's a published study, they probably do. Next, what methods did practitioners use to protect the validity of their investigations and not project their own assumptions on empirical evidence? Remember, you can look at how they collected data and how they analyzed data. You can end up having assumptions being put into the data in either of those two areas or both. In essence, how you collect it could end up putting assumptions in there. You could, for instance, only look for data that supports your theory based on how you collected the data. Well, then you just put your own assumptions into this. You've just made your study invalid. The other ways it could be is that you could collect data quite objectively and completely, but then when you analyze it, you're analyzing it only for that part that supports your theory. That is another way of throwing in invalid results into your study. And so you look for their methods that they used and how those related to the validity of the result that they were able to get from it. So if you find there were problems with that area, you're going to report them. If you find that they did a pretty good job of protecting the validity of their study, you're going to tell us how and why they did that. So you have to know these studies very well, by the way. This isn't something where you can just read them once and you're done. That doesn't work that way because you're going to have to go back when you're looking at this question to find out what did that study do. Often they will tell you what they did, but not always. Sometimes it's in there, but they didn't make it really explicit. There's not a section, for instance, on how they protected the validity of their study. That would make it very easy, but not often is that the case. And then how was their work grounded in theory? What theory did they use? And how was it grounded in that theory? How did they, what was that theory, and how did the study try to show whether that theory was correct or not? So if you have a strain theory as the theory that was being used in your study, for instance, okay, then how did the study try to support or refute, actually find out whether that theory was true in that particular case or not? How did they do that? Then what were the ethical considerations in conducting the research in this particular field and addressing the issue? This is where, when you're dealing with ethical issues, remember that you're dealing with making sure that your study, in this case, the study from your articles, does not do any unjustifiable harm to anyone. And remember, we can do that. Let's say if I'm doing interviews of people in prison in order to help me on my residential burglary case, I have to be very, very careful that I do it in a way that no other inmate knows that the inmates are being interviewed, because if they do, they think that they're going to be interviewed about something going on in the prison. They think they're a snitch. They're going to get themselves killed because of something that we did. We cannot allow that to happen. That's the ethical consideration. And so that's how you would write up an ethical consideration for that kind of study, is we made sure, and here's the steps we took to make sure that no other inmate knew that the inmates that we were interviewing, that they were actually being interviewed. so that there was no way that we would be hurting anybody by interviewing any of the inmates. Also, confidentiality is a big area for ethical considerations. Also, when you're putting test subjects, under certain stress of some sort, for instance, and we do that sometimes in designs, we want to make sure that we don't unjustifiably hurt people as part of our study. We can't do that. So, for instance, if we were trying to study, what makes people into alcoholics, we would have to, feed people lots of alcohol and see what it does, and then measure how many of them become alcoholics. Well, you can't do that, ethically speaking, because you're hurting people as part of what you're doing, and it's not justified by the result, and therefore you can't do it. You just can't do it. There are some times, though, where we're allowed to hurt people as part of our study. If you were doing a medical study and we had inmates who were willing to be guinea pigs, so to speak, for the medical research in exchange for them getting out of prison early, for instance, that might be justifiable, even though we might hurt some of them, possibly. There's a big benefit to the fact we actually have real medical studies. From people who are willingly able to do it, and they get a reward for it. So that's still possibly ethical, but we still have to talk about the ethical considerations. All right, number 4 is research question. And now this is what we worked on last week also. So go back to the last week's video specifically on how to form your research question. Very, very important to your research analysis is how you create that question. So in this section, you will develop a research question informed by your previous literature analysis. This question will assist your supervisor by focusing his or her future research in a specific vein of the criminal justice issue, as well as informing him or her of the possible assumptions and limitations of the research question. So what you're going to do is first you're going to develop that research question that addresses the contemporary criminal justice issue that you selected, this is where you're getting right down to what do you want to study. Remember, we have basic areas of domestic violence, but there are literally an infinite number of things you can study in domestic violence, the same for all the other areas. So you have to decide what do you want to study. And so that question becomes very important. They have an example here. Why have there been a rise of domestic violence calls within a given jurisdiction? Probably better, why has there been a rise in domestic calls over a particular period of time in a given jurisdiction? Because if it's just because domestic violence happens to be rising, that doesn't necessarily create a problem. Our population might be rising, and it's maybe just going along with the population. So we're not seeing a particular rise in the actual number of crimes relative to the number of people. So it has to be a rise over a particular period of time, not consistent with increase in population. All right, next is outline the existing assumptions and limitations of the research question. This research question is going to be the question that you're going to answer by your research study. So now you're going to have to say to your boss, well, I've got this research question. This is something we think we should study, but here are some of the assumptions I have to make with this, and here are some of the limitations I know that will exist. So, for instance, with my study, some of the assumptions I will make for my interviews with residential burglars who are in prison is that one of the assumptions I'll make is that they're basically going to be telling me the truth, which is not necessarily a good assumption. And so it's one of the limitations as well as one of the assumptions. But I might also be able to say, well, it's probably a good assumption because I'll have lots of these people I'm going to be talking to. And I expect that I'm going to see a lot of consistency among their responses to the different devices and tactics that they either like to see when they want to burglarize a place or don't like to see when they want to burglarize a place. And so I will see by that consistency what is probably true because we see a lot of consistency between people who don't know what the other person is answering. And so now I can say that's one of my assumptions is that the corroboration is going to come from the fact that we're going to see consistencies in the answers, generally speaking, and that's where I'm going to be able to assume that the answers I'm getting that are at least corroborated will be pretty likely true. But there's still that limitation that you're dealing with people who could just lie to you just to have fun, and they don't care. There's no penalty for it, so you get that kind of a problem. So limitations might also be is that your population of residential burglars are the ones who are in prison. So we don't know about the ones who are out of prison. We don't know anything about the ones who've never been caught. And so it might be a skewed list because it just happens to be whoever we've got in prison. But if it's a large enough group, it can give us some good results. So it's both a limitation and it can help us if we have a large enough people to interview. When we have 2 or 3 and that's all we're interviewing, that's a serious limitation because first we may not get consistent results, and second, we don't know whether we're really seeing what all residential burglars are likely to tell us. All right, so it gives you an example there. And then you're going to select a criminological theory that best explains the reasoning behind your research question. So you're going to actually name the theory, and I would name the strained theory for why people do residential burglaries, and I would explain why that theory is the one that supports what I suspect that the research study will show. Say, I'm not actually going to do this study. Don't worry about having actually have to do this study. You're just going to plan it out. But you have to have a theory. What criminological theory do you think explains what you think the answer is going to be when you finally do this study? Without a theory, you're really not going anywhere that can help you because your study has to try to see whether that theory is correct or not in that situation. And if you don't, then you're not going to have very meaningful results. All right, now here's a new part that's all new to you. You have not done it before, and so we want to go into a little bit of detail. That's the conclusions and future direction. It says to conclude, you will identify patterns in the research, discuss the importance of using the scientific method in research, and consider the future direction of research on the topic. This information will help your supervisor to further target his or her future research. Okay, first, what patterns did you identify in the research? This is of the 5 articles that you read that were research studies. And what conclusions would you form about your research question based on these patterns? So whatever patterns you can see in the results from your 5 literature analysis articles, whatever patterns that you were able to identify, how does that give you information about what the possible answer to your research question that you chose to deal with in that particular area? You want to ensure that you use both qualitative and quantitative studies when identifying patterns. What conclusions might you make about your research question based on these patterns? So how do those patterns tell you what is likely going to be the answer to your research question? Hopefully you've gotten studies that are close enough to what you wanted to do that these patterns will be predictive of what you're likely to get also. Okay, that's why we go to look for the literature in the first place, is to figure out what other people have done to get a taste for what's likely to be our result as well. Now, that's not always true, but at least it's pointing in a certain direction, and we just want to know what direction were the patterns pointing in. That's a couple of paragraphs for sure. Next, how did you use the scientific method to ensure you conducted your research ethically? Provide specific examples. For example, how did you use the scientific method to ensure that you did not project your own assumptions on the empirical evidence? So the scientific method is where we go out and we collect information in a way that is objective, complete, as complete as we can get it anyway, and therefore not skewed in one direction or another, for instance, to support our theory, but really trying to find the truth about the answer to the research question. By the way, the answer to the research question might ultimately not be the answer we want to see, and may end up indicating that we need to do a lot more research when we hope to find the actual answer to the question. So for instance, we have the question of domestic violence. Why is it increasing so much over the last 10 years in our jurisdiction? Well, we might find out that it doesn't answer the question. There is no way that it will do that, perhaps. That's sort of maddening. We put all that effort into this and we don't get an answer. But it will at least tell us some things that are not true, certain things that that we don't need to go after. And so we've sort of narrowed the field a little bit. So each study that we do out there that is done well at least gives us information about what's not true. And that can at least steer us in the direction of what might be true if we persist. And that's what criminal justice does. They persist until they find the answer. And sometimes it takes a bit of time. All right, so you want to make sure that you talk about how you use that scientific method to make sure that your results were valid. They were trying to find the truth rather than trying to come to a specific answer, and therefore your research was done ethically in that respect. Okay. And then the last one is, in what ways would future research of the issue benefit from a new approach or methodology other than those that you assessed in your literature review? So in essence, what ways could you suggest to your supervisor about new approaches and new methodologies that could help? So for instance, in my study on tactics and devices for preventing residential burglary, I might suggest, going to places where there are good targets of residential burglary, like affluent areas. They tend to be the ones that get the most burglaries because there's more stuff to steal, basically, and it's worth more money. Okay, well, I would go to those places. I would do a study of, let's say, take one whole neighborhood and find out how many of the preventative measures that I'm aware of exist in that area. Then I might then look for, historically over a period of time, how many burglaries there are in that affluent area with those particular preventative measures, and then take another affluent area that has a different set of protective measures that are being used, and then look for how many burglaries are taking place in that area to try to find actual experience with the number of residential burglaries that have been committed based on whatever particular measures I'm looking at. Okay, so I might find out, for instance, that one area has only 10% of the houses have burglar alarms, and another area 90% of them have it. And perhaps I'm only finding that only 10% of the burglaries occur in the area with 90% of burglar alarms. And maybe 90% of the burglaries happen in the area with only 10% of the houses have burglar alarms. Well, that's a new approach. It's not one I haven't seen. It's not in the literature. I haven't seen it anywhere, but I think it's a good idea to do that. So you want to do some thinking about new ways that might be better in how to put together a study to answer your research question. And then, how can a new approach and methodology improve the results? How would it improve it? Essentially, if you propose a new approach or methodology, how is it going to improve research generally in that field? That's important. That's a paragraph or two. And then, what future direction might research take on your chosen topic? And what are the theoretical implications of this research? So answer all these questions. The best way to do this is take each of these questions and make it into a heading. And that heading is something that will cause you to have to answer it, because otherwise you're likely to sort of, forget about it. And you take number, 5C, and you give me one paragraph, and it only answers one of the questions. You just threw away 2 or 3 of the questions. You're not going to do very well on it if you don't answer all the questions. So to force yourself to do that, take each of the questions. Actually, literally just copy them. Copy them out, and then paste them as a heading for each section and subsection. And then it forces you to actually answer the questions. So at least you're going to have something on there that I can look at and say, yes, you at least answered that question. You did a certain level of work, rather than nothing at all. Because if you do nothing at all, you can't get any points for it. If you do something, then you can get credit for it, whatever you do. Okay. All right, that's it for this last but very important written assignment for the class, the biggest anyway. And if you have any questions, again, I want you to email me. Give me 3 good dates and times along with your time zone for a telephone conference, and we will get you on track to do well on this assignment.